You're listening to Faith Connections podcast, where we are dedicated to connecting you to your faith. And now your hosts, Chris and Mari Torres.
Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to Faith Connections. Chris and Mari
Torres.
Torres. No, it's Torres.
Yeah, I can't do the high pitch.
No.
I'm nice and relaxed.
Yes, you are nice and relaxed. But man, we're excited to be here. We just ended a 2-part series. We started with the pains of depression. That was a 2-part series. And then we did a little segue with another 2-part series called the pains of anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so today's episode, it's a segue. God connected it. And, he's always working. He's always at work. But we're going to really talk about, man, it's one of my favorite Psalms. And I know I've shared it in the stream before, but we're going to break it down. We're going to break down this Psalm. It's Psalm 77. It's a Psalm of Asaph. But we're hopefully going to encourage you in knowing what to do, right? When you're faced, when you're troubled, when you are anxious, man, it's a 3-step process that we can learn from this Psalm that can help us. So today's episode is called Then I Recalled. Then I Recalled. So we're excited.
So I know I kind of discussed before coming on air, but can you tell us who Asaph is? Because I know for a while I didn't know who he was.
Yes. I didn't either until I started digging a little bit deeper and studying more. And Asaph was pretty much a psalmist, a musician, which you would consider, like a worship person, somebody who would just worship, but he would play instruments. Mm-hmm. And so he was, of course, he was there with David. He was part of, their group, their the harp team. Mm-hmm. So he that's why he wrote the Psalm, right? Because it's like somebody who creates music when you think about all these bands and things like that. So he would also play instrument. So he was gifted. Yeah.
And the reason I asked you to tell us who he was is because when you read this Psalm here, you were so excited, so pumped up, and you kept talking about Asaph and the prayer of Asaph and the Psalm of Asaph, and you kept. And I'm like,
who is Asaph?
This guy? What are we talking about here? Like, man, I've read so many.
Didn't David write most of the Psalms?
Yeah. So it kind of caught me off guard, and it caused curiosity for me that I too had to go look him up. But you explained to me who he was, and it was very interesting because most of the Psalms are attributed to David, Correct. But in this particular one, he was part of David's circle, and there were musicians and I guess he did play an instrument.
Yes, absolutely. So let's get into the Psalm real quick. It's Psalm 77, and it's a Psalm of Asaph. And it goes like this. It says, I cry out to God. Yes, I shout. Oh, that God would listen to me. When I was in deep trouble, I searched for the Lord. All night long I prayed with hands lifted toward heaven, but my soul was not comforted. I think of God and I moan, overwhelmed with longing for his help. You don't let me sleep. I am too distressed even to pray. I think of the good old days long since ended when my nights were filled with joyful songs. I search my soul and ponder the difference now. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? And I said, this is my fate. The Most High has turned his hand against me, but then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. Oh God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. By your strong arm, you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. When the Red Sea saw you, oh God, its waters looked and trembled. The sea quaked to its very depths. The clouds poured down rain. The thunder rumbled in the sky. Your arrows of lightning flashed. Your thunder roared from the whirlwind. The lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your road led through the sea, your pathway through the mighty waters, a pathway no one knew was there. You led your people along the road like a flock of sheep with Moses and Aaron as their shepherds. So I know you did a little bit of you were kind of studying this psalm, And you were kind of sharing with me that Asaph was, hurting for the people, and he was crying out to God.
Yes. So I did when you got excited about it, like I said, you drew curiosity. So I started looking into it. I read it. I tried to find out who Asaph was. And as I was reading why he wrote this, is that he was feeling anguish for the people. And of course, at that moment, as you read it, it just sounds like it's coming from him, and which it is. It's coming from him.
His emotions.
But we're thinking it's all him feeling all these pains and emotions and questioning God and asking and saying all these things. But right here at the last verse that you just read, you led your people like a flock. And I'm reading the NASB version, but you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So therefore, at that moment in that scripture, it's the aha. It's the aha moment, meaning that, man, he's talking about the people as well. So from what I read in some study notes were that he basically was feeling the same emotions that the people. So I guess as he was talking or whatever he was, when he was playing his music, fellowshipping, he eventually absorbed all that and carried those emotions with him. And then they became his emotions. And so what he was feeling what the people and expressing what the people were feeling, should I say, he was expressing it. So he was also calling out to God, crying out to God in kind of almost like in an intercessory type prayers sense, that he was intercessing for the people and calling out, but he made the people's cries and emotions his.
Yeah.
So, and I thought that was very interesting because, like, man, I would have not picked that up. But in these last scriptures there, when he references the people, he's talking about the people. He's not like, oh, that's what he. So,
what people is he talking about?
The Israel.
The Israelites.
Israelites.
Yeah. Right.
Because at that time, of course, he's in the circle of King David, and King David's leading the Israelites. You know, he's in charge of the Israel. You know, so therefore, the groaning and moaning of the people became his feelings as well. Yeah. And it got him thinking, maybe they are onto something. So then he starts, he made it his emotions, his feelings as well with the people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I wanted to kind of point that out, and because it was a different perspective, right? When you were sharing that with me, and man, this has been is one of my favorite Psalms, right? There's many, but this was one, has to be one of my favorites, and I love it. And so I'm excited that we're kind of digging deep. But one thing that stood out to me, if you really focus on verses, the beginning, right? Verses 1, 2, and 3, right? You know that Asaph he's in distress. He's in turmoil. He's hurting. He's going through a situation, whether it's because of the people or himself. But that expression, I cry out to God. Yes, I shout, oh, that God would listen to me. When I was in deep trouble, I searched for the Lord. All night long, I prayed with hands lifted toward heaven, but my soul was not comforted. I think of God and I moan, overwhelmed with longing for his help. Man, we've been talking about anxiety. We've been talking about depression, and we've been talking about facing situations that affect us in a very deep way. And so as I'm reading this Psalm, I could sense and feel the hurt of Asaph, where you're in this place, in this deep place, right? That it's like you're calling out to God, but the way I'm perceiving this, the way I'm experiencing this through his, like, as I'm reading it, and it's like I'm experiencing, like, I've been there before, right? I've been in that spot where it's like I'm crying out to God, but I don't feel God. Does that make sense? Like, I don't feel he's coming, or he's helping me overcome this situation.
Right. So I'm kind of smiling and smirking over here because that exact feeling, what you're feeling right now, and those are his emotions that were put on paper, right? Because this is what it translates to. Those are his words, his emotions. But what you're feeling, you can relate to him.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? These feelings that he's having and put on paper was exactly what he was feeling for the people.
Yeah.
So those emotions were also the people's. They became his. And another little thing, a little nugget that I read was that it really showed his true leadership as well. Because even though he's maybe not quite known throughout the Bible, he was in like this big character in the Bible. The fact that he was in David's circle, they probably studied and worshiped together is what they were saying. They worshiped together, right? Because he was really close in David's circle during that time, that season. But just what you're feeling, it's interesting that his words have become your words as well. His cries are your cries as well, because we can relate to it. We've been there.
Exactly.
And you're so right. A lot of these first verses really stand out, and I highlighted a lot of stuff. And especially in the night, in the NSV version, it reads in verse 2, in the night my hand was stretched out without weariness.
Here it says, all night long I prayed with hands lifted toward heaven, but my soul was not comforted. When I was in deep trouble, I want you to think about when I really want you to reflect this. When I was, there's always this could be past tense. This could be 5 minutes ago. Oh, when I, right? When I was facing that situation and couldn't overcome, man, when this happened, right? There's always a there will always be a when I. And so for me, when I'm reading this, that's what he's saying. He's like, when I was in deep trouble, he said, me, he's feeling that, he's experiencing that just the same way we do. Right. But he's not being comforted. And he's saying he's overwhelmed with longing for his help, meaning he doesn't have peace. He's struggling. He's feeling challenged, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's mental health. That's what our struggles are, right? Is we feel uneasy. We don't feel comforted. We feel anxious. We feel desperate sometimes.
So in that verse, though, what stood out to me was the hand stretched out. That's how NASB version reads. Can you read NLT there?
It says, with hands lifted toward heaven.
Hands lifted up toward heaven. So that the reason that highlighted that and it stood out to me was that is a common posture for prayer.
Yes.
And in the illustration that came to mind is, think of a small child when they're maybe nonverbal at that moment, but they're walking already, and they get tired. What do?
They go like this.
They stretch out their arms to their parent, whether mother or father, because they want to be carried. They want to. Hey, I'm tired, or put me in your arms, because I need to be fed, or I need to go take a nap. So what do? They stretch out. 'Cause, I mean, we've had kids, right?
Yes.
So we've all been there when they stretch out. Okay, and they stretch out their arms, and it's usually the parent. You just grab them, lift them up, and you cradle them, and you either rock them or whatever, right? You comfort them. So that is the posture here that stood out to me, because he's crying out for God. He's reaching out, and it's a common posture that we should always go to in those moments when prayer should be. Your hands should be lifted up to the heavens, like a child stretching his arms out to a parent, wanting to be comforted.
Yeah,
and that's probably at that moment, whether at night or you say your prayers before going to bed, whatever your custom is. You in the mornings as you're driving to work, you have a custom of saying your prayer every morning. But are we lifting up? Same thing when we worship at church. You should be lifting your hands. And why do you see people lifting their hands? Because that's the moment you're worshiping and praising, right? So it's kind of like when you go to a sports event. What do? You cheer for your team. You clap your hands and you raise your hands and you're high-fiving and pumping. That's what praise is and worship. So same thing with prayer. When you need to be comforted, you reach out to your heavenly Father and says, "Hey, comfort me, carry me."
And that's what he's doing. That's what Asaf's doing. Yeah. And it's interesting because verse 4, he's like, "You don't let me sleep. I am too distressed even to pray. I am too distressed even to pray. I think of the good old days long since ended." And so, when I read this, and of course, every time you read it, God reveals something different. And for me, I remember I was going to get ready to go visit one of our sisters in the hospital, and I was like, God, just give me a word, and this is what he gave me. But he gave me a different perspective, because Asaf here, when he's like, "You don't let me sleep, I am too distressed even to pray," one thing that really stood out to me is sometimes when Asaf's reaching out to God, which is great. So it shows like he knows who to run to.
Right.
He has someone that he can count on, right? But sometimes when we're in that deep turmoil and all the emotions are there that we're experiencing, we sometimes don't feel God because we're too filled with emotion. We're too filled with that recent experience that we're struggling, and we feel like, oh, he doesn't hear us. He's not here. And to me, when I'm reading this, that's exactly what I feel, right? Mm-hmm. But when he's saying, man, you don't even let me sleep. You don't even let me, like, I can't even pray. I think about the times when we're trying to reach out to God and we're trying to get closer to him, right? Maybe we're going through a situation, but man, we're so distressed and the enemy tries to distract you sometimes. Have you ever prayed and all of a sudden you're praying and all of a sudden, I don't know, a thought goes into your head and you're like, wait, I'm trying to pray, right? And then, or you get distracted with something and you're like, man, I'm trying to pray. And so that's happened to me. But the enemy wants to kind of like draw that wedge and separation. Like, no, don't run to your father.
I'm laughing because I want to make a joke about it. It's like, only if you have ADHD, that, oh, look, squirrel.
Yeah.
The enemy knows, okay, that person has ADHD.
Or ADD, not even HD. You don't even got to be hyper because I got ADD. Yes.
No, so I'm just joking with that. But it happens to all of us.
It does. And I've spoken to many people. They're like, man, Madi, that happens to me all the time, you know? And I'm like, I know, I've experienced it, so I can relate to them, right? And I like this because in verse 5, so it goes from, we're painting the picture. He's distressed. He's going through this experience. We don't know specifically what it is, but we kind of know from the historical facts. But he's distressed and he's getting distracted.
Right.
And then, okay, I want you to think about, so verses 5, 6, he's saying, I think of the good old days long since ended when my nights were filled with joyful songs. I search my soul and ponder the difference now. So he's reflecting back, man, when I was filled with joy and at night I would just praise God and everything was great. I wasn't experiencing what I'm experiencing now. So it kind of, and I ponder the difference now. Well, we go through many seasons in our life where, man, we're at the mountain, we feel great, everything's good. And then there's seasons in our life where, man, we're in the valley and things don't feel that great. I mean, and that's what he's doing. He's like, man, I'm pondering the difference now. How did I go from that to where I am now?
So, and it's very interesting because I highlighted it as well, and it stood out to me because I'm wondering, he's pondering what the difference is, right? Mm-hmm. Right. But to me, I'm thinking, why should it be any different? Why aren't we still in the moment when we're in the midst of our trial? Why aren't we praising and worshiping? Why aren't we lifting our hands up in song as well? And he's remembering of those things because he wants to bring his mind back to a joyful time, to a time of when things were good, right? Yeah. So in the middle of whatever struggle, whatever the trial, whatever tribulation you're going through, we have to do that. We have to.
And we'll get to that. But this reminds me also of Lieutenant Ray in this last episode. He's like, I don't know why we do that. It's like, we know God is there, we've overcome, but it's almost like we forget. We forget that what God has done in our lives.
Well, I think it's because we get caught up in our lives, and
and we focus on the problem,
right?
Because we're filled with the emotional aspect of the situation in the moment. And it's almost, we lose sight. It's
and we know the answer to that because Scripture says that God always gives us a way out.
Yes.
But do we see that? Do we know that? Do we feel that? In the moment, we don't. We forget it.
Correct.
We don't see the way out. We see as this is it. I'm done.
So verses 7. So then we transition. So you have this person that's in distress. The enemy's trying to distract him. That's how I'm reading it. And then I want you to check this out. This is what God revealed. Verses 7. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? And I said, this is my fate. The Most High has turned his hand against me. I want you to think about it. What causes someone to start believing those lies?
Sorry, ask that again.
What causes someone to start believing those lies? Because all of those are lies. We start questioning God, and the enemy wants us to question God. He wants to remind you, well, where's your God now? Where is he? because you're going through this situation.
That's part of the schemes, and I think we preached on it. One of the schemes of the enemy is
to cause what? Discouragement, defeat, distraction, delay, diversion. So, man, that's exactly it. So when I read this, I'm like, oh, the 5 Ds right here. The strategy, the 5 Ds is all right here. And he's starting to believe this, right? He's starting, that's what it looks like. But I love this. And this is really what our episode is about, is when you're faced with a situation and you start feeling defeated, discouraged, and in your thoughts, you start questioning, well, where is God? Why am I going through this? You start questioning yourself. And we continue to do that because, again, we're filled with the emotion and we're facing the problem. I love this because in verse 11, he does this. And there's 3 points to today's episode to help encourage you in how do you overcome a situation when you're in that situation. How do you overcome? How do you turn things around? How do you just hit the switch and turn it around? And he does this, verse 11. But then I recall all you have done, O Lord. So the first thing when we're faced with these situations is we have to remember God's great works. That's the first thing. We have to remember God's great works. And that's what Asaph does. He's like, man, but then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. So think back to another situation where you were stuck, you were, where you felt defeated, where you felt like you weren't going to be able to get out of it. And then reflect on, did you overcome? Because you're still here.
So on to that point, some of the things that I wrote that I jotted down because that stood out as well, because that's the transition right there of the Psalm. How quickly we realize that we put ourselves in these situations many times. We did it ourselves. Right? We put ourselves. If we focus on the negative, well, of course, it seems like the problem is bigger than what it really is because we're focused so much on it. We make it bigger.
Yeah.
Right. And then how quickly we are to blame others. Right. You start blaming others and you start blaming different things. So now you're just reaching out. And then the last one is you always start blaming God at that point. Right. Because you start losing hope. You start losing faith. And it's our own doing many times.
Yeah.
But do we ever reflect and think it's our own doing? God's grace never stops pouring out. God it's like, and you just said it earlier. Sometimes it feels like God's not there. But God's grace never stops pouring out. God's love never stops. God's mercy never stops.
Yes.
God's righteousness never stops. God's kindness never stops. God is never ending. So if God's the Alpha, the Omega, the never ending God, He's always there, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Yeah.
Then why are we feeling this? Is because we put ourselves in the situations and we forget. But Asaph turns it around and says, let me recall what the Lord has done for me already in the past. And I remember, and that's what he remembers of those nights when he was singing and praising and rejoicing, right? And so he was able to be comfortable or was comfortable during that time. It was a peaceful time. So guess what? Let's recall that. Let's go back to that because I know that this situation doesn't look good right now. It doesn't feel good.
Yes.
But I know what the Lord has done.
Correct.
So why wouldn't he do it again?
Exactly. And that's the key is you have to remember God's great works. And then after that, there's 3 steps. That's the first step. The second step is you need to meditate on God's great works. Prayer. And meditate. It was funny because I was sharing this message with the kids and they're like, Mom, is it okay to meditate? Is that like a spirit, because they were thinking in a different aspect, but meditate.
The science.
That's exactly, what they learned. Yeah. And I was like, well, meditating is pondering, it's thinking, it's thinking about something, and it's a spiritual thing, either way, but that's exactly what it means. And so just really meditating on God's great works. And this is what he does, because after he does this, he says this. He says, I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. So he's thinking about them. He's thinking about them. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. So he remembers God's great works. He meditates on God's great works. And then the third thing, and then he starts saying, oh God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. By your strong arm, you redeemed your people. So when he starts saying, ooh, you are the God of great wonders, right? Oh God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? And then he says, you are the God of great wonders. He starts talking about God's great works. And so that's the third thing, is we have to remember.
Speak life.
Yes, we need to remember God's great works. We need to meditate on God's great works, and we have to talk about God's great works. And Asaph does this because he starts saying, you are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. By your strong arm, you redeemed your people. He starts talking about what he did, and the people he's talking about is the Israelites when he delivered them from slavery in Egypt, and he split the Red Sea for them, right? So he's going on and he's talking about the power of God and reminding himself, man, if you did that for Moses and the Israelites, what can't you do for me?
That's right.
What can't you do for me?
That I mean, if that doesn't bring you, I mean, it brings a little bit of excitement to me, but more than anything, it brings hope.
Yes.
Because if you're suffering or going through something right now, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whatever mental issue, mental illness, let's get mental wellness in it. Right? Let's start speaking life to ourselves. Let's start turning around and saying, hey, let me seek out help. And that's what Faith Connections is all about. And that's what we're here. And we just thank you for tuning in, you know, and hopefully this is well received here.
And I want to encourage you after this, after you hear this, I want you to go and hear a song called Another One by Elevation Worship. Another One. Man, it's a powerful song, but it's a great reminder that, man, miracle after miracle, open door after open door. It's coming. Here it comes. Like, it's, you know, you're meditating like, man, if you've already done it for me once, God, you will do it again. If he told the sun when to rise and it did, he will do it again. If he told the sea to split and it did, he would do it again. If he told the storm be still and it did, he would do it again. And so that is talking God's great works.
Right.
So we hope that you were encouraged by today's message. Remember, when you're feeling distress and turmoil, you're facing a situation that you feel that you cannot overcome and that there's no way out, all you have to do is, then I recall all you have done, right? You just tell yourself. So remember God's great works, meditate on God's great works, and talk about God's great works. Thank you for tuning in. We hope that you were encouraged. Make sure that you share this stream, you like, you comment. Thank you so much for tuning in to Faith Connections, where we connect you to your
faith.